right, well, thank you, Rabbi, for that not well-deserved introduction, but nevertheless very much appreciated. The one thing the Rabbi forgot to say is I am, in fact, single, so if you have friends who are single as well, that's the real reason we're here, let's be honest. So I'll do three quick disclaimers. Number one, Ben Shapiro actually told me a few weeks ago I talk too fast, which is a little weird coming from Ben, but I have been told I talk quickly, so if you find that to be the case, just raise your hand. I'll do my best to slow down, but it's not, no, there's no way. The only, usually people who raise their hands that early on are like 85 plus, but okay, I'll do my best. The second disclaimer, I'm not texting, but I get distracted quite easily, so I use my phone as a timer. In fact, I'll tell you one quick story, distraction number one. I was in a synagogue a few months ago in Miami, and like 40 minutes into my talk, I look at my timer and I think to myself, wow, I'm really doing pretty well on time, and it turns out I forgot to start the timer. So I was ready to keep going, but the rabbi was like, get the hell off the stage. So I promise you I've started the timer. And okay, let's, without further ado, the story of anti-Semitism at Harvard University, in my opinion, really begins about 100 years ago. The president of Harvard University in the 1920s and 30s was a man by the name of Abbott Lowell. President Lowell, like most Ivy League university presidents, was, anyone? No, not Jewish. Anti-Semitic, but close. He was one or the other. He was an anti-Semite. His name was Abbott Lowell. He was an anti-Semite. In his brilliance and wisdom, he decides the best way to get rid of the Jewish problem. In his own words, there were, quote, too many damn Jews at the university. In his brilliance and wisdom, decided the best way to tackle it was to actually create a quota, a legalized metric of discrimination, where you put a cap on how many Jews are admitted into the university. And just as a fun fact, you can impress all your dates with this, although I have tried, it has not worked. There were more Jews at Harvard University as a percentage under the quota system than there are today. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it's 4% Jewish, and it's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there has been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard. And you don't even have to take my word for it. There was a, I'll backtrack for a second. There was a leading moral philosopher of our time by the name of Claudine Gay. And that was a very good joke. Thank you for the one person. Tough crowd. And Claudine Gay, it's funny. She was the president of Harvard, and she's taken like 10 years off my life. I swear to God. I told my dad a few weeks ago. I said I think that I think about Claudine Gay more than her own husband. And he said, you really should not say that out loud. It's a very odd thing. But Claudine Gay, she's the head of what's called the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is one of the largest departments at Harvard University. And she decided shortly after the George Floyd riots and the Black Lives Matter movement, shortly after, that words can be dangerous, words can be derogatory, words can be violent. And without getting into the politics of it, although I'm happy to do that later. Harvard, because they always have to be better and different than everybody else, they don't use the term RA, a resident advisor, to describe a graduate student who lives in an undergraduate dorm. They use the term, anyone know? Master of the house, which is not a great term, and all things considered. If I was there in 1636, I would not have voted for it. And she decides, again, in the wake of George Floyd, words are dangerous and derogatory and all that, so they rename it. It is now no longer called Master of the House. It's now called a Dean or a Tutor of the House, which I am not black, spoiler, but if that's what makes my African-American friends and classmates feel better and more included and welcome, then fine, I'm really not opposed to it. The problem is, if you recall our friend Abbott Lowell, the plurality of Jewish students at Harvard University right now live in a dorm called Lowell House. They live in the building named after the dude who didn't want them on campus to begin with. So if you want to play the whole DEI game that everyone needs to feel safe and included and have their, safe spaces, I'm not particularly opposed. The problem is Harvard has consistently, historically, and routinely deployed a double standard when it comes to their treatment of their treatment of minority students and their treatment of Jews. And again, you don't even have to take my word for it. So there's an American NGO called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions. You should intern for them. They're very cool. And they decide 4 years ago to rank 248 American universities as to how well they commit themselves to free speech, the First Amendment. Do they celebrate intellectual discourse and academic dialogue? Out of 248 American universities, you know what Harvard University was ranked? 248th. They were ranked dead last. This is an institution that, again, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to discuss the politics for now, this is an institution that demoted an African-American professor for coming out against Black Lives Matter. This is an institution that continuously disinvites speakers who are deemed transphobic or misogynistic or racist. They actually unenrolled 12 admitted students when they were posting sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group. So just be careful what you post. I mean, you shouldn't post sexist memes to begin with, but you know what I mean. And This is not an institution that really has any strong track record of protecting or promoting free speech. And by the way, just another epilogue to this, Fire redid the rankings a year ago, and they decided to rank 251 American universities. And you know what Harvard was ranked this time? 251st. They actually fell 4 spots, which is pretty impressive. 3 spots. Which makes it very odd that my very first month of being a student at Harvard University, this is way before October 7th, a man by the name of Muhammad El-Kurd was invited by the Palestine Solidarity Committee, which is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I met in my life. That was good. The Palestine Solidarity Committee decided, in their brilliance and wisdom, this is the individual who they want to come to speak on campus for the 3rd time. For those of you who don't know who Muhammad El-Kurd is, well done, you are not missing out. He's an idiot. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. I can barely afford the grocery market here, so I can assure you we don't. This is someone who, it's very expensive in LA, I've learned. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed not only that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, but that we need to, quote, normalize massacres. This is someone who has routinely said that the Israeli occupying forces are analogous to Nazi Germany. And for those of you who have the misfortune of being on Twitter, number one, please follow me. My mom actually stopped following me. She said I'm too political. I'm like, Mom, you are like contractually obligated to love me. She's like, So I said, we're suing Harvard. If you're not following me by the time we're done with the lawsuit, maybe I have to sue you, which I thought was very funny. But she did not, and our family dinners have been very awkward ever since. Point being, Muhammad El-Kurd is someone who has posted on Twitter, and I quote, "All Zionists must perish." Yeah. So the Palestine Solidarity Committee, and by the way, just one more plug about following me on Twitter. Douglas Murray follows me on Twitter. I think that's a very important point to make. And he has literally said we need to normalize massacre, not Douglas Murray, Muhammad El-Kurd, has said we need to normalize massacres, Zionists should perish, all that. So we go to Harvard DEI, we go to the Harvard admin, we go to the president, and we say, look, rightly or wrongly, you have this very strong track record of disciplining speech you do not like. Why don't you simply apply that logic to someone who's so vehemently anti-Semitic, he has quite literally appeared on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites, which is very impressive to get on that list considering how much competition there is to get on that list. And Harvard did something remarkable, something they had never really done before, which is they shrugged their shoulders and they said, well, he has a First Amendment right, what do you want us to do about it? I mean, it was a shocking double standard, it was blatantly anti-Semitic, and as we proved in court, it was discriminatory and it was illegal. And if you Google my name, which please don't, but if you do, one of the attacks I get most often from the mainstream media is I'm like this conservative partisan Republican hack, which number one, I don't know many Republicans who voted for Bernie Sanders twice, but number two, it's okay, I was a surrogate for the Trump campaign, so I'm repenting. But I deliberately went to a university to study religion and politics where I was the only Jew in my program who wore a kippah, the only one who kept Shabbat, who kept kosher. I deliberately went to a university where I would be intellectually challenged and challenged to go beyond my intellectual comfortable limits, which is what a university should be about. It should be about debate and dialogue and disagreement. The anecdote I want to highlight is I joined, not as a member, but as an observer, my very first month there, a group called the Jews for Palestine Liberation. And I joined them not because I agree with them, but I specifically said, look, there are not a lot of us at Harvard. I want to show that I believe that you have a right to be here just as much as anyone has a right to be here. And in fact, they actually, you know what Tashlich is? Tashlich is in the high holy days, we throw bread into the river to like ceremoniously cast away our sins. But because the Jews for Palestine Liberation are morons, they did their Tashlich ceremony in winter when the river was like freaking frozen. And the entire Tashlich ceremony was to cast away our sins of settler colonialism and apartheid and genocide. Again, this is all before October 7th, and to cast away the sins of settler colonialism. But point being, I deliberately went into these spaces because I wanted to be challenged to move beyond my intellectual comfortable limits, which is why the very first class I took at Harvard was a class called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine. Yeah, it was a crazy class. This class was taught by 3 professors. One of them was a former spokesman for the internationally designated terrorist group, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. That's besides the point. In this class, we were literally taught as fact that historically, the Jew has been powerless. And with the advent of the State of Israel in the 20th and 21st century, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can now understand why the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, are so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. And you should all read the Harvard Anti-Semitism Task Force report, which was finally released because of pressure from the Trump administration. But you can read that report, and it basically corroborates what I've been saying for a very long time, which is professors at the School of Religion were explicitly stating that their goal was to, quote, de-Zionize Jews from their Judaism. I mean, they said this explicitly. In fact, I actually wrote an article. I went to Aish Torah in Yeshiva for 2 years, so I know Aish. But I actually wrote an article for Aish.com entitled Anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I wrote it in October of 2021. And no one read it, trust me, but it was there. I was talking about it for a while. So in this course, in addition to the political indoctrination, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but again, I'm suing them, so teshuva. But I wrote my final paper, which was worth, I believe, 50% of my grade, on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure, so I'll Google him, with an epilogue. And in the epilogue of that paper, I denounced my religious Zionist values, and to this day, it is the only paper at Harvard I ever received an A+ on. And it was not a very good paper. I used like ChatGPT for a third of it, but that stays between us. You can cut that from the recording. But that's, but that's just one class. I mean, there was another class called Narratives in Displacement, the case of, take a guess? Israel-Palestine. Just as a side note, I was banned from China for 3 years. I have an arrest record in Poland. It's probably why I'm still single. And you weren't supposed to laugh at that. And what's fascinating is the Religion and Public Life Department, where I take most of my classes, because again, I studied religion and politics. They have had, since October 7th, more than 75 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more events on a country than every other country combined. They're obsessed with Israel-Palestine. So this class, Narratives and Displacement, is really interesting because in addition to being a regular course throughout the semester, they actually take you to what they call Palestine. I say it's what they call Palestine because like the Palestine they take you to is like Ben Yehuda Street and they pretend it's Ramallah and the students are too dumb to realize that it's not. And I think I'm very funny, by the way. No one ever agrees, but I just want to get that out there. And I apply because, again, I'm not this partisan Republican MAGA fascist, and I apply. And during my interview, because it's very competitive, because it's Israel-Palestine, so everyone wants to go, I apply, and these three professors, two of them were from the prior course, they say, Shabbos, my name is Shabbos, by the way, hi, like the day, and that is why I got the name, that wasn't meant to be a joke, but, okay, they say, you know, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I didn't know if they meant because I wear a kippah. I didn't know if they meant because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. And I said, yeah, it's so important I go on this trip because in my insular Orthodox community, we're not allowed to discuss Palestine, which of course is not true, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. So I kid you not, this is how the conversation went. They said, well, we're really concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, well, we're really concerned because if we take you to Palestine, which again is like the shook, and and we show you, again, this is all before October 7th, and we show you the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, the settler colonialism, the genocide, through the process of unlearning, which is a term so monumentously dumb, only a Harvard academic can come up with it. You will be so, thank you for that was a good laugh. Thank you. You can sit in the front. They said, through the process of unlearning, you will be so psychologically traumatized from your trip, you will be no longer able to associate yourself back with your Jewish day school, back with your Jewish synagogue, back with your Jewish summer camp. And we, as your professors, don't want to be held responsible for that psychological trauma, so they rejected me from the program. Okay, I'll tell you one last class, then I'll move on. This class was called Religion and Peace, the case of, very good, Israel-Palestine. It's all Israel-Palestine. If I'm going to ask for a class in like 2 minutes, it's going to be Israel-Palestine, so just remember that. And this professor gets up, this is at the law school, and she says, in politics, this is the first day of class, in politics, in media, in academia, the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative, which I know in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we're very liberal on our marijuana laws, but I'm not sure what she was smoking because that is so laughably absurd. So, okay. She says, therefore, in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class, which again is called Religion and Peace, the case of Israel-Palestine, will not discuss, will not study, will not read, will not learn any texts if they were written by Israelis. And this course was taught 4 years. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for it. This is fully corroborated by Nitzan Plitman, who's an Israeli student at Harvard Law School. She wrote an article about this in Haaretz, which I know it's Haaretz, but still it's a good article. So when people ask me my reaction to anti-Semitism at Harvard or across institutions of higher learning, my reaction is relatively succinct and it's relatively consistent, which is I'm shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised, because this is the inevitable outcome of decades and decades and decades of political indoctrination masquerading itself as academic worth and intellectual discourse when it is literally nothing other than a deep-seated hatred of the Jewish state and an obsession with the Jewish people. And in the interest of time, and again, I did start the timer. By the way, today is my 5-week anniversary of donating my kidney and my 4-week anniversary of moving to LA. And this is very exciting. Wait, no, I didn't get to the exciting part. The exciting part is as I was getting into my car to come here, my mattress frame was finally delivered. So I'm very excited, because when I'm done here, I'm going to build my mattress. No more sleeping on the couch for this guy. So I will be quick. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump ahead to October 7th. I'm going to jump ahead to October 7th. October 7th was the joyous Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, and we're at Harvard Chabad, and we're dancing, we're celebrating. It's funny, I speak to a lot of high schoolers. I actually just spoke to Eula, and I said we were drinking lots of water, and definitely looked like water. And all of a sudden we hear these rumors. There was a bombing, there was a shooting, no, there was a stabbing. The reality is, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, as evident by the fact you're in this room, the reality of having a modern state of Israel in the 21st century unfortunately means there is terrorism. It's not good, we don't like it, but it happens. As I said, I studied in Eshet Torah, which is 2 minutes, it's in the old city of Jerusalem, 2 minutes away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Western Wall. One of our rabbis was actually stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist outside of Jaffa Gate. So in fact, there was actually another stabbing of a 12-year-old boy one door down from me. So when we heard that there was a terrorist attack, again, we were bothered by it, but A, we didn't fully know the extent of what was happening, and B, in an almost like sick, cynical way, it's almost par for the course. The problem was, as the night went on, the rumors persisted and the rumors strengthened, and it became readily apparent that what we as young people were experiencing was something we had never experienced before, which is Israel as an existential issue. And the next couple of minutes are like a little, not graphic, but a little sad, so I'll tell you to break it up, a sort of funny story. I speak at Miami a lot because I have a beach and they pay well. And because it's Miami, the average age of the audience is deceased. So as I'm speaking, the joke does not work so well in Miami, I have found. But they're all like 90. I was like, what did he say? Anyways, and they're probably dead by now. And too far. We love our grandparents. And I'm getting to like this part of the story, and I tell the audience, I say, I'm a young person. I was 4 years old during the Second Intifada. I was not alive during the First Intifada. I was not alive during the First Lebanon War, 73, 67, Suez Canal. And I said to this audience, unlike many of you, I was not alive during the 1948 War of Independence. And they got, so offended, how dare you, we're not that old, but like half of them actually fought in the 1948 War of Independence. It's like, I don't know why they were mad at me. Point being, the reason I say this is we as young people, we don't question the legitimacy of Israel in the same way we don't question the legitimacy of Spain or Brazil or Ireland. Well, maybe we should question the legitimacy of Ireland. Different story. Israel is a strong Western country, and you don't question its existence. The problem was not that Hamas committed acts of terrorism, and this is where I get a lot of pushback. The story of October 7th is not the story of October 7th, because Hamas is a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that throws gay people off of roofs, but they're also very damn clear as to what their goals are. I mean, you could read their charter online in English from 1987. Their stated goal is the eradication of the Jew from the river to the sea. So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, Hassan Nasrallah, the since deposed head of Hezbollah, he couldn't make it here tonight, he has stated for years, it would be great for all the Jews to pack up and move to Israel, because it would be so much more convenient, he says, to kill you in one location than having to hunt you down country to country. So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, again, it's bad, there should be a forceful response, but it's who they are, it's what they do. To me, the story of October 7th is the most educated, the most progressive, the most elite, the most sensitive, those who, I know them personally, they were friends of mine, they were classmates of mine, they were even professors of mine, those who introduced themselves with their preferred gender pronouns, those who took knees for Black Lives Matter, on the night of October 7th, not months after the fact, on the night of October 7th, 34 student groups at Harvard University, from the Muslim Student Association, from the Feminist Society, to the Bengali Dance Association, which I did not know was a thing, but it is, because they're awful, both in dance and politics. On the night of October 7th, these 34 student groups at Harvard, they watched the images in real time of Jewish women like Naama bleeding from their private areas and being hoarded into trucks. And they watched the images of Jewish babies like Kfir and Ariel crying as they're being loaded onto motorcycles and taken into Gaza. And they saw the images of these mangled, burnt, charred bodies. And the immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard University on the night of October 7th was to jump out of bed, some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's not hyperbole, it's not speculation, it's not exaggeration. The statement literally begins, we hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East. You know how many times they mentioned or condemned Hamas in that statement? Zero. Zero. In fact, there's a great documentary you should all watch. It's free on YouTube. I'm not saying that's why you should watch it because it's free. That would be anti-Semitic. But it happens to be a good documentary. We could make those jokes. They can't. It happens to be a very good documentary, Crisis on Campus. And they interview me. I'm not saying that's why the documentary is so good, but it helped. And whatever. And you know, I give them my shtick or whatever. And then they interview 3 of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard. And if you thought the Palestine Solidarity Committee were intellectually challenged, these 3 girls, they're at Harvard Law School. And again, you can watch it for yourself. The director asks them, this is in April, so a couple months after October 7th, he says, at point blank, given the hurt, given the outrage, given the controversy elicited by your statement, do you regret not condemning or even mentioning Hamas? And these 3 students with their keffiyehs and their, glory to the martyrs, they look at each other, and I kid you not, watch it for yourself, they do this. No, we don't regret it. We didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. I mean, why do we care about Harvard and Columbia and Penn and okay, I'll say UCLA, but not really. It's because, unfortunately, these are institutions that purport to train the next generation of American leaders. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States. And if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids are going to read, I am telling you as fact, America's at a dangerous inflection point because, yeah, they call death to Israel, but literally the next part of the sentence, as I've heard countless times on Harvard Yard, is death to America. They were literally chanting, this is last spring, before the strikes in Iran, quote, if Iran doesn't get it, shut it down. I don't even know what they were referring to. They vandalized all my Israeli flags. They also vandalized and burnt my American flags. I mean, yeah, it's true. They, vandalized the pictures of of the Israelis, but they've also vandalized the posters of Hersh Goldberg Poland and of Omer Nutra and of Keith Siegel and of Aviv Siegel. I mean, this is what I tell Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate. It's what I tell President Trump. It's what I tell the mainstream media. This is not like a Jewy issue or like an anti-Semitism issue. This is an issue that strikes at the core of our Western civilization, the heart of our American democracy, and our liberal values. When you can have the alleged best and brightest of a given populace, a given society, a given campus, see in real time the murder of 45 Americans, including the abduction of more than a dozen Americans, including the bodies of Americans that are still being held by Hamas in Gaza, then it stops becoming a Jewy Israel issue and it starts immediately becoming a uniquely American issue. And if you remember the Religion and Public Life Department, where I took all those insane classes, they released their own statement on October 10th or 11th. And their statement begins by saying, and I quote, "The great Palestinian poet once said," which is a weird way of starting the sentence. And they go on to say, if you start the story, exactly, death to the infidel. And they start, and then they followed up, specifically death to Shabbos Kestenbaum, but I digress. They said, if you start the story on October 7th, and not the story of the 1948 Nakba, and not the story of the illegal displacement of the Palestinian people, and not the story of ethnic cleansing, and not the story of years of attempted genocide, you'll only get one side of the story. I mean, you know how many times these professors condemned or even mentioned Hamas in that statement? Also zero. I mean, where do these brain-dead students get their brain-dead ideas from? I'm sure if we do a Q&A, you'll ask about Qatar and the foreign funding, and it's a good question, and we should talk about it, and I was speaking to members of Congress this morning about a new bill, but the reality is, where do these students get this idea from? It's from the professors. When you have professors telling their students as fact that the greatest last outpost of Western settler colonialism is the state of Israel, and I'm going to cancel classes, but give you full credit so long as you live in a tent and call for an intifada. It's not like rocket science when students go out and do that thing. So on October 13th, there's a rally at Harvard University, and it's 1,000 students and professors. This is before Israel begins any serious retaliation into Gaza. And these 1,000 students and professors are in their keffiyehs, in their glory to the martyrs and globalize the intifada jackets. And one particular idiot gets up by the name of Kojo. Kojo actually just finished a fully sponsored trip to communist Cuba, where in his own words, he will, quote, take lessons of the revolution and impart them on college campuses, which, problem for another time. But anyways, Kojo gets up and he says as follows. He says, Hamas, which is the only time Hamas was mentioned in that rally, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. We will look upon them in 10, 20 years as freedom fighters. Who are we to condemn the resistance? And you know what the immediate reaction of America's alleged best and brightest of the 1,000 professors and students and classmates? Thunderous applause. Not one things to condemn, to challenge, to walk out of that statement. Not one. It is no coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, there was a physical assault against an Israeli Jewish student at Harvard Business School. And by the way, the two assailants of that attack, one of them was just awarded a $65,000 fellowship by Harvard Law School to study with the CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which has direct ties to Hamas. And the second assailant, he was a classmate of mine, Elam, he was actually just awarded the honor of being class marshal at graduation. It is no coincidence that 2 weeks after that, a Jewish undergrad at Harvard was spat on for wearing a kippah. It's no coincidence that a month after that, an Israeli student was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made other classmates uncomfortable. It's no coincidence that 3 weeks after that, a Harvard employee vandalized all of my hostage posters, writing on Kfir Bibas, quote, his head is still on, where is the evidence? Writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in his secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posted a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face, saying he wants to fight, he's coming after more than blood, and he's bringing down the Zionist mafia. I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Chabad to make sure I was okay. And of the dozens of phone calls and emails I sent to Harvard inquiring about his employment status, because he knew where I lived because of the Harvard directory, to this day they have not once responded to me. It's inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard has historically, routinely, and consistently treated its Jewish student population. And I'd like to think of the last year and a half, I've been relatively, calm and somewhat collected, except on Piers Morgan, because it's impossible to speak on that show. But there's one thing that I really will not be able to forgive and forget, and I apologize because I often get emotional when I speak about this. But during the encampments, when students lived in tents and refused to shower for 4 weeks, it smelled awful. It was like a dangerous combination of BO and communism. They, and I should know because I was a communist up until like October 7th. It's terrible. You don't want to live with these people. Forget about the fact that they called for an intifada at all hours of the day, and forget about the fact that they've violated all time, place, and manner restrictions for 3.5 weeks at Harvard University. Every single time very outwardly Jewish person, it's funny, people often say, did you wear your kippah at Harvard? Were you scared? And I say, my name is Shabbos Kestenbaum. So like with or without the kippah, have you seen my nose? So what bothers me the most is every single time that I went to class, I walked on Harvard's campus, I cut through Harvard Yard. Every single time I did that, safety marshals who are classmates who had like their own security. Sorry, I get very emotional when I talk about this part. They call themselves safety marshals, and they had like their own mini security apparatus on campus. But they were like students. When they would see me approaching, they would take out their phones and they would start following me to class, and they would start recording me. And I would ask them why, and I would ask them to stop, and they would never respond to me. And in fact, the last week of the encampments, they actually got notepads from the National Lawyers Guild, and they would write down which building I was studying in and other Zionist agitators. And we told the university president and the president of the United States, but he was dead at the time, so he couldn't really answer. We told him that we were being followed on our way to class, and we were being targeted. There was one night actually. Sorry, this part's hard. But there was one night where I was walking back to my dorm, and a safety marshal, which again, like a classmate who puts on a safety vest, he comes up to me. I didn't know who he was. He says, "Just keep walking, Kestenbaum." And like I told the university president that like we were being targeted, and to this day they've never responded to us, and more than they never responded to us. Alan Garber, the president of the university now, he actually told the encampment leaders, if you agree to pack up your tents we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation, which oversees Harvard's $50 billion endowment, to discuss divestment from Israel. And if you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with senior Harvard faculty to discuss the establishment of a Palestinian Studies Center. And of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments, who vandalized, they literally used bolt cutters to break open the locks at Harvard's gate. Of all of those people, 0 were suspended, 0 were expelled, 0 were disciplined in any serious way. And you know how many times I've been able to meet with the Management Corporation or the senior Harvard faculty? Also 0. But if you call for an intifada loud enough, and if you follow Jews on their way to class long enough, and if you vandalize enough property, you will be given a seat at the table. And we filed our lawsuit in January of 2024. Harvard's response pertaining to the obvious civil rights violations of Jewish students under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Harvard's response when we filed that lawsuit was not to apologize for their treatment of Jewish students. It was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism. They actually filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, which if you watch Suits, you'll know what that means. They essentially asked a judge to toss out our lawsuit and to set a legal precedent so that no Jewish student in the future could hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. And when we filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit in June, Harvard's response was the exact same thing. No apology, no recognition. They filed a second motion to dismiss with prejudice, once again saying to the judge, toss out Kestenbaum's lawsuit and set a legal precedent so that he and other Jews can't do this again. And it really pisses me off to no end that Jews have to be involved in this, in legal efforts. So the word is not like satisfied or proud or happy, but whatever the proper adjective is, in July of last year, our Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, he actually struck down, he dismissed Harvard's double motions to dismiss. He wrote a 25-page scathing ruling against Harvard, writing in part, quote, "The facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students," and we actually became the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus to actually go to trial. It had never happened before up until that point. And if you... Again, I don't know if the word is proud, but Kestenbaum v. Harvard has actually already been cited in half a dozen legal briefings by Jewish students across the country who have filed similar lawsuits against their respective universities. We work very closely with the Trump administration and the White House, and any press report, any investigation like they found 2 weeks ago that Harvard, through the DOJ and the Department of Education and Health and Human Services, they had found that Harvard had discriminated against Jewish students and therefore are ineligible for federal funds, which is something I had been working on for a while, and very, very proud and happy that the Trump administration is doing that. They cite Kestenbaum v. Harvard, so I'm very, very proud that we set that legal establishment. Having said that, I don't want to end talking about our ideological adversaries, because as much as I get introduced as someone who combats anti-Semitism, that's actually not what I do, and if that is what I'm doing a very crappy job at that, because it's not really helping. Rather than define myself by what I fight against, I try to define myself by what I fight for, and in that spirit, I'll tell you a quick story. I was fortunate enough to speak at the Republican convention. This is not a political statement. I asked the Democrats if they wanted me to speak at their convention too. I'm still waiting for them to call me back, but we will see. That was a good joke because the convention was last year. Tough crowd. And the morning of my speech, a limo picks me up from my hotel, which again, if you have single female friends, tell them this story. It's very cool. A limo picked me up. Again, that's like one of the only cool things I can say on a date, but I don't know what to say after, so it has yet to work. And the limo takes me to the convention arena. We do what's called a walkthrough. A walkthrough is as boring as it sounds like. The stage manager was a man by the name of Eric, and Eric says, "Mr. Kestenbaum, this is what the podium is going to look like. That's the teleprompter to look at. This is what your hair and makeup's going to look like," which is a little weird coming from the Republicans, because the transgender stuff, but okay. Okay, that you laugh at. An interesting crowd. And they said, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions? And as you can tell by how I'm dressed, I really don't care about my hair and makeup. I didn't care the podium. I'll tell this off the record. I didn't care what was on the teleprompter, because actually the speech I gave and what was on the teleprompter were two very different things. I ad-libbed almost all of my speech, which really upset the Trump campaign, but I digress. And after doing this very boring 2-hour walkthrough, I tell Eric, "I really have no questions. I'll see you later tonight." And I turn around to leave. I open the door of the limo, and as I'm opening the door, something in my psyche kind of just stops, and I don't really remember why or what caused it, but I turn back around and I say, "Eric, I take it back. I actually have one question. Can you promise me when I give this speech later tonight in front of, it was 40,000 people in the arena, in front of President Trump, in front of millions of Americans who will be watching on TV, can you promise me one thing? Can you promise me that the camera that's televising my speech will be able to clearly see that I'm wearing a kippah?" It is the only question I asked, because I have two friends, well, I have more than two friends, friends, although not by much. I have two. Okay, self-deprecation works for this crowd. That's the one thing you jerks laugh at. I have two friends at Harvard who, in response to October 7th, have taken off their kippahs. I lecture all over the world. I was just in Amsterdam. I have a list in my phone of hundreds of Jewish students who have told me that they've taken off their kippahs, they've tucked in their Star of David necklace, they've ceased their involvement with Jewish life on campus. And I thought to myself, irrespective of the substance of my speech, and regardless of the words coming out of my mouth, the only thing I really cared about was that those two friends and the hundreds I made along this very bizarre journey would be able to clearly see that in the 21st century, young American Jews can and should and must be wearing their Jewish pride as loudly and publicly and confidently as ever before. It's the only thing I cared about. And in fact, right before that speech, I was in what's called the Speaker's Lounge. I was eating chips with a J.D. Vance, and he is very weird, I will be honest. The Democrats were not wrong on that front. Just don't tell the White House I said that. And it's actually funny, because as we're eating, Newt Gingrich, he starts trying to third wheel the conversation. I'm like, Newt, not now. He was the former Speaker of the House, for those of you who didn't get the reference. And all of a sudden, a young woman, an usher, comes to get me, and I'll say something that happens to be very funny but a little inappropriate, but it's okay. I first said this story in a synagogue, and I didn't say an usher came to get me. I said an escort came to get me, because she was escorting me. And like, as I'm getting into the story, the rabbi looks at me in the back like horrified. He's like, "What do you mean an escort came to get you?" I'm like, "Yeah, an escort." Oh, no, it wasn't that. That was for the other delegates. That wasn't for me. So, that was for Newt. Anyway, so now I'm very careful when I say the story to say it was an usher. So the usher came, and she escorted me. I don't know how else to describe it. She escorted me down a very long corridor. We were flanked by Secret Service on either side. And we get to a very small room backstage. In this small room backstage, it's four people. It's myself. It's Lee Zeldin, who's now the administrator for the he's now the secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency for whatever reason. And it's Omer Neutra's parents. Omer Neutra, I used to say, is the American Jewish hostage being held by Hamas, but of course we heard the horrific news 6 months ago. He was killed on October 7th. There was actually an audio recording of his final moments. It's pretty terrible to listen to, but at the time we very much thought he was alive as a hostage. And I go up to his parents, Ronen and Orna, who've since become, I always joke with them that they have become my adopted parents, and they're like, "No, we're okay." But they're amazing. I'm very, very, very lucky to know them. So I go up to them. This is the first time I met them, and I say, "Look, there's certainly nothing I can say. There's definitely nothing I can do. I just want to add that the courage, the bravery, and the inspiration that you have given me on an individual level is something I will never be able to repay for the rest of my life." And I walk out of the backstage room, and I give my speech. And if you watch my speech, which you don't have to, you're not missing much, but if you do, you'll be able to see it from when I enter the stage. What you won't be able to see is 5 seconds earlier with tissues trying to wipe my tears. And remember, the Republicans had me in makeup, so the mascara was all, at least half of you laughed. And I've been blessed and privileged to, as I said, travel across the world. I've met some important people. I helped accompany President Trump to the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on October 7th. I was at the White House a few weeks ago. I'll be going back next week. I've been blessed to give some pretty big speeches. But I can tell you, I'm not going to say Bli Neder, because we all know that means I'm about to lie to you. But I can promise you that of all the people and of all the places and all the speeches, none of them hold a candle to the 2-minute conversation I had with Omer Neutra's parents. And in fact, I speak on college campuses a lot when they don't disinvite me after finding out I was a surrogate of the Trump campaign. But when I do speak on college campuses, I spoke at Binghamton University, which is in upstate New York, over the holiday of Sukkot. This is in October. And it was about 100 or so Jewish students, and I tell them it's great to see new faces, it's great to see familiar faces, but I can't help but notice there's one face that isn't here, and that's who? It's Omer Neutra. Omer Neutra was meant to be a student at Binghamton University, and he deferred for the year to volunteer in Israel. And I tell the students, this is not a geopolitical conflict in the Middle East. This is not a hostage crisis happening elsewhere. This is a story about you. It's a story about your friend, your classmate, your neighbor. And, he can't be in class because his body is being held as a bargaining chip. I mean, it's a real story to real people that is currently happening. And I'll just say one other thing. One of the first things I did after October 7th was I booked a one-way ticket to Israel. I say it's one way, that's really because Delta canceled the return ticket because there was a war, but leave that part out when you mention me to your single friends. Just say one way, he's very heroic. And I spent 3 weeks digging graves for soldiers who were killed in Gaza. I spent 3 weeks delivering supplies to army bases. I spent 3 weeks playing guitar for injured civilians in the hospital. And they said, "Please, we've suffered enough," because I don't have a very good voice. They were like, "Take us back to Gaza." I'm like, "Bro." But I did that because, I wanted to get the hell off of Harvard's campus, for sure. But it's also because I've never in my life, I've never felt more connected to the land of Israel, more attached to the people of Israel, and more proud and confident of my Jewish values, bar none. And in fact, I was at, if you ever, any Bostonians? Okay, oh, one, nice, okay, whatever. Nobody's perfect. And no, that was to all of you. The one guy who raised his hand, he's cool. The rest of you, kidding. I'm in Boston's Logan Airport, and remember how after October 7th, we were all added to like 30 different WhatsApp groups of donating socks and underwear, and so I was the unfortunate schmuck who got all the suitcases to bring to Israel. So I had like 30 duffel bags of like bulletproof underwear, and I'm checking, which I was thinking there's no way the soldiers need this, but anyway. I'm checking in with all these bags, and as I'm checking in, this is again October 13th, 14th, there's about 20 people to the right of me. These are young people. They're blasting Hebrew music. They were throwing candy at us. They actually thought I was in Miluim, I was in reserve duty, so they kept giving me food, and I kept saying I'm not. But then at a certain point, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah. Steak too, yeah, it's going to be a tough road in Gaza. And anyway, they're blasting Hebrew music, they're throwing candy, they have American flags, they have Israeli flags. And this young girl comes up to me. I had never seen her before. I haven't seen her since. I don't know her name. I don't know where she's from. She cannot have been older than 12 at the oldest. And she comes up to me and, sorry, I get very emotional. She comes up to me and she hands me an envelope. And she says, here, I want you to have this. And I hold the envelope and I realize what's inside the envelope. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of $100 bills. And I go to this 12-year-old girl and I tell her, there's no way I could take this. And instantaneously, this 12-year-old girl, who I don't know who she is, she wrapped her arms around me and starts crying, please, please, take it for me and promise me you will give it to the first person you see in Israel. Yeah. That to me is the story of the Jewish people. That to me is Jewish peoplehood. And I'll tell you one other story. As I said, I go to Miami a lot, and I'm in the middle of a talk. And in the middle of my talk, a woman raises her hand, and she says, I want to add something. And if any of you have spoken publicly, it's never a good sign when in the middle of a speech someone says, I want to add something. I get death threats weekly from the far left and the far right. I'm very bipartisan. Both sides want to kill me. It's true. I've had rocks thrown through my window. I get criticized a lot in the media. Never a good sign, so I get very, very nervous. And this woman gets up. I kid you not, this is what she said. This is in Aventura. This is 5 months ago. She says, my name is Regina. I'm 103 years old. I'm a survivor of Majdanek. I'm a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. I'm a survivor, and I fought in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I want you all to know, she says, we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. And then she sits back down. And if you've ever met the president of the United States, whether it's Biden or Trump or anyone, anytime you're with him, especially if you're actually in the White House, his schedule is very structured. So when you're with him, there's a finite amount of time. Even though I've met him numerous times, it's always very controlled. And the first time I was with the president in the Oval Office, it occurred to me, well, what do I say? Because I know I only have a couple of minutes. And I had faced a similar dilemma when I was at the Israel President Herzog, when I was at his home as well. You only have a finite amount of time. And I told them, I said, Mr. President, President Trump, Mr. President, President Herzog, these are two separate occasions. I told them that story of Regina, and I said, Mr. President, on behalf of the thousands of young American Jews who in response to being told to go back to Poland, and in response to having their mezuzahs stolen and their American and Israeli flags burnt, and in response to having their libraries and classrooms shut out for them, and having their dorms vandalized, have put on a bigger kippah, have tucked out their Star of David necklace, have said, I may not be religiously observant, but I'm going to light Shabbat candles, or I'm going to adopt a soldier and recite a chapter of Psalms for him. On behalf of those thousands of young American Jews, Mr. President, I am telling you, we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. That was the first thing, and actually only thing I wanted to tell both presidents the first time I met them. And I'll tell you one last story, and then I promise I'll shut up. I was part of a delegation I'm not an influencer, but for whatever reason I was invited to the Influencer Summit, and it was awful. Oh my God. Okay, between us, this cannot get out of this room, all right? I'm friends with a lot of they're all great people, and they have great hearts and all that. But we once had a talk, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to us, and he looks across the room at all these influencers, and again, for whatever reason they invited me. He's like, you guys, you're our first line of defense. I'm like, if these guys are our first lines, we are screwed. Anyway, I was part of an influencer delegation to Israel. The foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, which, by the way, I fact-checked Piers Morgan on live TV because he referred to Bezalel Smotrich as the foreign minister. And I said, no, it's Gideon Sa'ar. And I only knew that because I was on a bus with him. So, fun fact. Gideon Sa'ar took us to an area called the Kerem Shalom border crossing. The Kerem Shalom border crossing you probably heard of because it's on the border of Egypt, Gaza, and Israel. What's the other one? And he wanted us to see with our own eyes the more than 800 humanitarian aid trucks going into Gaza on a daily basis. Feminine hygiene products, clothing, baby formula, medicine. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. Miles and miles of trucks just waiting to get in. And by the way, whether that's a good policy or not, that's not the point of the story. And as we're watching these trucks go in, I'm standing next to a young IDF soldier, and I'm not allowed to tell you her name, but she was younger than me. She was 20 or 21. And I asked her, as we're watching these trucks go in, I said, you told us that your job is to clear the roads each morning to make sure these trucks can get into Gaza. I'm just curious, as a young Jewish woman and as an IDF soldier, how do you feel about your job? And she says, well, to be honest, Shabbos, I feel a little conflicted. And I said, well, why do you feel conflicted? She says, I kid you not. She says, I feel conflicted because my cousin is a hostage. I said, what? She says, yeah, my cousin's name is Don Alexander. And that was at the time where we did not know if he was alive or not. And thankfully, he was actually at the Ohel of the Rebbe today with his parents. And of course, the last time his parents were at the Ohel was with President Trump on October 7th. So going to the Ohel works. But point being, what a remarkable testament to the Jewish people. What a remarkable testament to Jewish peoplehood. And one last thing. My brother had his second child recently, and the child's first 2 days was spent in a bomb shelter because the child was born the day Iran launched the 200 ballistic missiles into Israel. The child's Brit Milah, the circumcision, it was on October 7th. And the next day, the child's father, my brother, he puts on a uniform and he reports for reserve duty in Lebanon, where he is right now. And I remember texting my brother, asking him what was going through his mind and how he was feeling. And you know how he responds? He says, what an immense privilege. For the first time in 3,000 years, I have a uniform to put on. And what an immense privilege for the first time in 3,000 years, I have a land and a country to defend. And what an immense privilege for 3,000 years, I have a land, I have a people, and I have values worth protecting. That is the story of the Jewish people. That is the story of Jewish peoplehood. And I will close by simply saying that if you want to help me and if you want to help the multitude of Jewish students across college campus, if you want to preserve the golden age of American Jewry or help the security of the land of Israel or ensure the Jewish future, I am urging you in whatever way, utilizing whatever individual talents you may have in whatever capacity, to stand up and join us in that fight. At Harvard Chabad, we have so many people, we actually can't fit everyone anymore, so we have to clear out the top floor. Whatever it means to you, what fighting back, what resistance, Jewish pride, whatever it looks like to you, just do it. Join us in that fight. And if you do that, I am telling you as fact, you will be a living, breathing testament to the power and to the promise that Am Yisrael Chai, that not only do the Jewish people live, the Jewish people will always live now and forever. Thank you. Questions? Okay, thank you.
That was awesome.
Do we have questions?
Can you do Taco Tuesday every week?
Yeah.
Who thinks you should do Taco Tuesday every week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes.
Yeah, questions.
Any questions? A few?
Yeah, in the back. Do they need a mic? Should I just repeat the question loud? Okay, I'll repeat the question loud. Actually, before I take your question, I'll just say one quick disclaimer. I speak to a lot of Jewish groups and non-Jewish groups. I just spoke at the Christians United for Israel Summit. It was like 30,000 evangelicals. Here's how non-Jews ask questions. It's like 10 words or less, and there's a question. That's it. And with Jews, here's how we ask questions. First, this is typically with older groups. They'll ask if I'm single, which we definitely have clarified. Yes, good. Just keep that in mind. Then they'll ask me if I'm related to the Kestenbaums and Pico. I am not, but I'm sure they're great. And then, again, this is more of like an older audience. They'll say, when I was at Columbia in like 1974, I'm like, okay. So in the interest of time, just like 20 words or less with a question at the end, just so we can get to everyone. Deal? Yeah. That's fair. I feel like that's fair. Okay, in the back. Yes.
I just want to say I appreciate that somebody like you, with your voice and your wit, is holding it down on the front lines for Jews.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. We could do it that way too instead of questions. Everyone just goes around complimenting me. What they like about me. Yes.
What was your major at Harvard?
Oh, I studied religion and politics, so technically it was a master's in theology. I just graduated. Yeah.
So the news says that the settlement for the Harvard lawsuit is confidential.
Yes.
Can I ask what it was?
The question was, I recently settled with Harvard. The terms of the settlement are confidential, and the question was, can I ask what it is? No. I will say this, because I do have to be careful with this question. I originally... there was an initial settlement offer that the other plaintiffs agreed to that I did not think was satisfactory to what we were looking for. And then, however many months later, I did settle. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah?
I want your take on this. Why must the double standard against Jews exist? Is it our proximity to whiteness? Is it the fact that we don't fit the perceived minority archetype where they can't virtue signal for us?
Yeah.
Is it resentment?
Sure. The question was why the double standard, and I'll first animate that question by talking about, to be a little selfish, me. I've seen that firsthand because the far left. I voted for Bernie Sanders twice. Actually worked on Bernie's campaign. I marched for Black Lives Matter. I marched at the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I volunteered for the Jamal Bowman campaign. Like I'm a bleeding heart socialist up until October 7th, and now I work for PragerU, so I'm a MAGA fascist. But don't tell my boss I said that. But it's interesting because the far left, people who I marched with and all that, they have. If you go on my Twitter, I actually posted some screenshots about this a couple months back. I've been called a white nationalist numerous times, like by many, many people. I'm a white nationalist. And on the other hand, Nick Fuentes, really, if you know who Nick Fuentes is, he's like this, I call him an unwitting celibate individual. When he talks, which I think is very funny, when he talks about me, he goes through the prism of he is white and he is trying to preserve white identity, and I, Shabbos, and the other Jews trying to silence free speech or whatever are not white. So it's actually interesting to see that play out in real terms. I think there are two ways of answering the question. Number one is from my religious biases, which is if you read the Hebrew Bible and you believe it is the Word of God and it's a living, breathing document, then it's not particularly a surprise when there's anti-Semitism because it's prophesied numerous times, I think first in the book of Deuteronomy, that you will be a scattered people, you will be a hated people, and you will be an oppressed people. That's one of the problems with what our situation is today, which is being in exile. We can't really conceive of being in exile because we have really comfortable lives, but being in exile means you will not be liked. And we have seen that being repeated and recycled throughout human history, and I think that's just a fact of life, which is why I'm not actually interested in defeating anti-Semitism. Like, it's bad, we should do something about it, but it's really not my focus. I'm way more interested, and I talk about this with heads of Jewish organizations, with Jewish nonprofits. I say this so many times, and it pisses me off that, I literally met, I can't say her name, but I met with a billionaire yesterday, because she's talking about, redirecting some of her funds. And help, combat anti-Semitism. Stop giving to more Holocaust museums. I study the Holocaust. That's one of my areas of focus. We don't need more of them. We should go to the ones that are there, and actually went to the Holocaust Museum in LA. It was on my Instagram story. It's a very good museum. We don't need to build more. We don't need another ADL dinner. We don't need another fellowship to combat anti-Semitism. Is money thrown down the drain. If you really want to combat anti-Semitism, you would make sure there's not a single American Jew today going to public school because their parents can't afford yeshiva tuition. You would make sure that Jewish summer camp enrollment doubles. You would make sure that every single young Jewish person can go to Israel as many times as they want on fully subsidized trips. That is how you defeat anti-Semitism, and it pisses me off to no end that the adults in the room and the people with all the money really don't see it that way. So going back to the religious biases, we're in exile, and there's anti-Semitism, and it will always be irrational. And by the way, if you go to Aish, I studied in Aish for a couple of years, but they talk about the proofs of God, which is always a controversial term. Can you really prove God? And one of the ways they try to look at the legitimacy of the Hebrew Bible is they'll say there are things written in the Hebrew Bible that if a man was writing it, there's no way a human being could know this. And I want to add to that because I think December 6th was the hand of God in real time. Anyone know what happened on December 6th of 2023? Okay, it was the congressional testimony of Claudine Gay, Sally Kornblum, and Liz McGill, three of the most morally bankrupt individuals in American history. And I'll tell you some behind the scenes. We were working with Congress on drafting those questions. It is the most watched congressional testimony in American history. It has 1.7 billion views and counting. Elise Stefanik, who's going to run for governor, and she's great, when she asked that infamous, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's code of conduct? which, by the way, it does. I became like an expert in the Harvard Code of Conduct and the bylaws. It's like all I did every night. It's why I have no friends. It very much does. But point being, that was not meant to be a trick question. I know, because we helped write the questions. The trick question was meant to be the follow-up question, which is, now that you said, yes, it violates your rules, how come you've allowed the calls for genocide? That was meant to be like the gotcha. Elise Stefanik was so caught off guard when Claudine Gay, the then president of Harvard, said it depends on the context. Again, rewatch the tape. She literally says, and I quote, "This is a softball question. I will give you a second chance to respond." And then Claudine Gay says, no, I promise you, it does depend on the context. How can you get on paper at least, some of the smartest, most well-educated, most sensitive, most progressive, most safe space-oriented individuals in American history to testify in front of millions of Americans on live TV, under oath, in front of Congress, that you actually could call for the genocide of Jews? To me, that was the hand of God, because it was God saying what he said in the book of Deuteronomy, that anti-Semitism will always exist and it will always be irrational. You will never be able to legitimize or justify it. And I think having the most educated, relatively progressive people saying you can call for the genocide of Jews, saying it confidently, really underscores what God had said 3,000 years ago. So December 6th should be a day that lives in infamy. FDR got it wrong. It wasn't December 7th. That was a good historical, but again, it is lost on this crowd like most of my references. In terms of the other double standard, I was just on a podcast yesterday and I mentioned this. I said, look, the anti-Semites, whether it's the far left or the far right, they believe that AIPAC controls the American government. They believe that we control Hollywood. And I said that on this podcast, which I think they're going to publish tomorrow, I said, if you really believe that that is the case, again, I wouldn't say I'm not a Republican, I'm still a registered Democrat, but I'm more conservative-minded than I was before. What a pathetic philosophy of life. Because if you think AIPAC controls government, this is a free country. Build your own lobbying group and lobby for your causes. You think Jews control Hollywood? Okay, create your own content. You think that Israel is a foreign policy blunder? Okay, well then go to DC and advocate for your beliefs. I've been to DC dozens of times. I've never seen any of the anti-Semites there, because all they do in their mom's basement is just LARP on Twitter and just bitch about the Jews. Like, it's just such a loser mindset. And this is why I often say, because there's a major problem with anti-Semitism on the right and the Republican side as well, it is such an anti-conservative philosophy that I cannot succeed in life, and I cannot build my future, and I cannot have a relationship, I cannot have a family, I cannot advocate for my political causes because something the Jews. It's just such a victimhood mentality that is so dumb and really makes you a loser. And I think that's the argument that we should probably go for. I think it's probably more effective to just say, all right, Nick Fuentes, you're right, we control the media. So what are you going to do about it? You're just going to bitch on Twitter? Like, okay. Meanwhile, we're going to control more of the media. So, yeah.
I'm curious about your mindset. And this is me kind of go back to high school. I'm just kind of curious your mindset applying to Harvard, getting into Harvard, first year at Harvard, when all this bullshit starts happening, to now. I think a lot of people go to college and they, regardless of whatever happens in the college, feel like they, for better or for worse, feel good about the fact that they went to the university or have still some kind of fondness for it. Like, I went to UC Davis.
I spoke at UC Davis.
Oh, yeah. No,
they did not like me there.
Yeah, it's colorful crap. Like, for better or for worse, that's still my university. I still have some appreciation for it, with all its flaws. I'm curious what how your mindset about Harvard has changed from the time you applied to now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not saying this to sound braggadocious. I just want to use a dirty word, provide some context. I didn't think much of it when I applied, for whatever reason. I don't actually remember what it was that animated me to apply there, but I actually got in with a full scholarship, plus they offered me a living stipend, like they paid me to go. So I always joke, I don't think Harvard was anti-Semitic after October 7th, but they're definitely anti-Semitic now, because I think we gave this Jew like tens of thousands of dollars to study at Harvard, and he thanks us by suing us. But when Harvard gives you that offer, it's very difficult to say no to, of course. But I'll say this, I wanted to learn and study religion from a non-sectarian, pluralistic academic perspective. That is virtually unheard of in the Orthodox community, because if you're an Orthodox Jew and you want to study religion, what do? Just go to a yeshiva and get rabbinic ordination. But to study with women and gays and Muslims, to talk about that the Bible was a man-made document, it's just so out of left field. And in fact, my rabbis at Aish were all very much against the idea, and what's super annoying is now they always call me, say, we told you. Which, like, fair. But I felt that I owed it to myself while I was still young and didn't have many responsibilities to study for religion at a perspective and a standpoint that I would never be able to get the opportunity to do so again. I knew that there would be the anti-Israel double standard, but number one, I was very, very progressive. I was very far to the left, which is funny because every time like Nick Fuentes says, you're a shill for Bibi Netanyahu, I have like dozens of photos of me marching against Bibi Netanyahu in DC, in Kaplan Square in Tel Aviv. So I was very, very far to the left. So A, I kind of agreed with it, and B, when it came to the anti-Semitism, I figured, well, they just don't know us. If only they just got to know us, and they would realize how great we are. And that did not turn out to be the case, which, by the way, if you read Jewish mysticism, which I'm no expert in, but the Zohar makes this point quite often. The Zohar talks about how anti-Semitism is actually a reflection of the Jews trying to assimilate. And the more Jews trying to show that we're just like you, the more anti-Semitism comes into the forefront to say, no, you are not, you are very different, and have a very different biblical mandate. So in terms of my thought process of going to Harvard, I don't particularly remember the exact reasons. I applied to Yale as my safety school. I got rejected from Yale. Full scholarship to Harvard, so it's hard to turn that down. I actually I'll tell you a funny story. I found out I got accepted into Harvard when I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I go to Auschwitz very, very often. I'm in Poland quite often. I actually just did a 60-mile bike ride from Auschwitz-Birkenau to the Jewish Community Center of Krakow. That was a couple days after my kidney donation, so it was a terrible idea. I did it with a 94-year-old Auschwitz survivor, Bernard, who's a great guy, but a shitty biker. And I hope you're watching that, Bernard. He's awful. And he told me once, okay, I'm going to butcher this, but to paraphrase what Bernard said, it's a really sick joke, and I wouldn't say it unless Bernard himself told me this. He said, Shabbos, I really like you. If I was Joseph Mengele, I would select you to work. I'm like, what? Who says that? What a sick man. But I guess if you were in Auschwitz, you could say that. But anyway, so I'll tell you the funny story, although I guess that was kind of funny. I knew that the decisions were coming out that week as to whether you got in or not. And as I was entering Birkenau, I got a notification that the Harvard decision was in my inbox. And I said, okay, I have to be in the right mindset. I'm not going to look at it. And after like 2 hours, I'm like, okay, I got to look at it. And okay, this is like really sick, demented humor. Please don't repeat this. But I was like in front of one of the crematoria. And I like it says like, oh, congratulations, full scholarship. And I'm like, yes, oh, no. So like I wanted to reorient that. I wasn't happy about that because there was like a tour group in back of me. I'm like, that is sad, this is good. And I called actually an Auschwitz survivor friend of mine, and I told him how I had this very conflicted feeling of like, this was probably not appropriate of me. And he said something really interesting. His name is Sam. He said, and again, this is before October 7th, so I guess he was prophetic in some way. He said, 80 years ago, the Jews were in one situation, and 80 years later, we're in another situation. So it was meant to be that, you found out you got accepted right then and there at that particular place, which I don't know what he meant by that, but I guess in some way, in Judaism, we don't believe that you can cry about the cards you are dealt with. Rather, I'm going to butcher the line, rather it is incumbent upon you to deal the cards in your own way. And I think that's probably what Sam was like alluding to. And God put me in this situation to be at Harvard for whatever reason at a particular time. And I hope I'm making him satisfied at least by, continuing fighting for Jewish values. So that was very existential. That was very therapeutic. After October 7th, I could either pay to see a therapist or get paid to speak, and I picked option 2 because it was more profitable. But this was very therapeutic, so thanks for the question. Anything else? Yeah.
Last question.
Last question, yeah.
When the protests at the college campuses started, I was especially concerned because it kind of gave me the impression that you're allowed to excel as a Jew, but not present as one.
Mm-hmm.
That was like my main concern, that like Jews would be kind of phased out of like being in higher education as a Jew. And I think the efforts you made were, very poignant in reversing that trend. But I mean, how do you think it is right now? Like,
How do I think what
How do you
is?
think the state of
Like Jewry on college
Jewry on
campuses?
college.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to end it. So the question was essentially, tell me if I'm doing this justice, what is the state of American Jewry on college campuses today?
yeah?
Yeah? Okay.
Preface, yeah.
Fine. First of all, actually, I'll give a good example. I was a scholar in residence at YIC, the Young Israel of Century City, a couple months back, and I gave 4 separate talks over Shabbat. And I never tell people where they should or shouldn't go to college, with the exception of Columbia University, because it is an incubator of stupidity. And I actually got into some trouble because I was on a podcast about a month ago, and I said I would not hire any Columbia graduate from the class of 2028 onward. And I encouraged the business world, and I spoke to Bill Ackman about this. You shouldn't hire Columbia grads, is like point blank. And if Columbia wants to be productive to society, they will turn themselves into a parking lot. And because there's not a lot of parking on the Upper West Side, it would really help. So I never tell people where they should or shouldn't go to college. Having said that, though, I give these 4 talks at the Young Israel of Century City, and this mom comes up to me Saturday night and she said, I went to all your talks, and she says, I just want you to know I'm still sending my kid to Harvard, which, again, I never tell people where they should or shouldn't go, but okay. And I said, at the very least, I think you should read the Harvard Antisemitism Task Force report. Just, read it for the sake of your own kid. And she's like, yeah, maybe, and then walks away. I'm confident. I know this very, very well. I have not changed a single parent's mind. I have not changed a single school's mind. In fact, most yeshiva high schools don't invite me anymore because of my ideology pertaining to college campuses. I went to SAR High School, which to their credit did invite me, but they're a high school that I believe charges $45,000 a year, and they very much can justify that sticker price by saying, well, your kids will get into Harvard and Columbia and Penn. And once you take the ideology or paradigm shift of, well, maybe they shouldn't go to Harvard, Columbia, and Penn, then it's kind of hard to justify the $45,000. So here's my take. You ready? Jews do not need Harvard because Jews will continue to be innovative and resourceful and creative. That's who we are. It's what we do. There's a reason we've outlasted the Byzantines, the Romans, the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians. We have been around for 3,000 years. We will be around for the next 3,000 years. We will be titans of industry. We will be whoever it is we decide to be, because that's the Jewish story. Harvard, on the other hand, very much needs Jews. Okay? Jews do not need Harvard. Harvard needs Jews. It's the other way around. And if Harvard insists on accepting a radical, loud minority of students who burn American flags, who call for the eradication of Western civilization, like the moral philosopher of our day, Mahmoud Khalil, who disrupt our classrooms to call for an intifada, then go for it. But we're so much better than you. And I don't just mean the Jewish people, the American people. It is a very, very good thing, in my opinion, that hundreds of millions of dollars in donations have been withheld from Harvard University. Harvard has had a 27% drop in early applications. They've had a 5% drop overall in applications. They are on the cold open of Saturday Night Live. I believe, as someone who worked on the Trump campaign, that one of the reasons Trump was reelected, or elected again, was the American people were really sick and tired of the elitism, the intellectual bankruptcy, and the moral hypocrisy stemming from these elitist institutions. There are 6,000 universities in this country, 6,000, and most of them are excellent. Harvard does not have a monopoly. Harvard does not have a monopoly on good-paying jobs. Harvard does not have a monopoly on intelligence. Harvard does not have a monopoly on the national conversation. I cannot tell you the amount of billionaires and hedge fund managers and CEOs, including a billionaire I literally spoke to this morning, who've told me to my face, Shabbos, we don't want to hire graduates anymore from Columbia, from Harvard, from Yale. And honestly, I think that is a very, very good thing. I'll give you one quick example. Whether you love Donald Trump or hate Donald Trump, the day after Donald Trump was reelected, some Harvard professors canceled classes. They baked lemon squares for their students. They hired Sunshine the Puppet to console students. There was story time with Marty. There was basket weaving, and there were free massages. I'm not making any of this up. You go on my Twitter, I documented everything. And the business world looks at this, and they look at the culture that Harvard and way too many of these institutions are normalizing and accepting and celebrating, and they're saying we do not want individuals from that culture and from that environment. The last thing I posted on Twitter, I'm very active on Twitter, so if you go on my Twitter, the last thing I posted was a friend of mine, Congressman Randy Fine, who has said many outlandish things. I don't agree with him on everything, but he was absolutely right. They gave a hearing this morning in DC. I was actually meant to go there, and they were grilling 3 university presidents from Berkeley, from Georgetown, and from CUNY. and Randy Fine is asking the Chancellor of CUNY some questions, and all of a sudden, City University of New York, and all of a sudden a protester storms into the room and says something genocide. And immediately, Congressman Randy Fine, you watch the video I posted because I don't do it justice, he says, shut up and get out. And then he tells the 3 university presidents, I blame you guys because you have normalized this. And he's so absolutely right. This was what I posted on Twitter. There is only one institution in American life where it is accepted, it is normalized, and it is encouraged that if you don't get your way, just cry and scream and yell and vandalize and smash whatever you want, and that's college campuses. The business world will never, ever, ever tolerate this. In fact, ironically, with some Harvard graduates went to the Google office in San Francisco, and they said, I don't remember the exact details, but something to the effect of, we're not leaving until you divest from genocide or whatever. And you know what the head of Google did? He hauled their ass out of the building and sent them to jail, because that is not how civil society operates. And for whatever reason, the only exception is American institutions of higher learning, and in particular, the Ivy Leagues. So again, I'm not telling you, you're probably all out of college by this point, but I'm not telling you where to go or where not to go. All I am saying is what matters significantly more than where you went to college, what your degree is your values. The things you believe in. I'm not saying this to sound braggadocious or arrogant, God forbid, but in the last year, I studied religion. The only thing you can do with a degree in religion is apply for unemployment benefits, okay? There's nothing practical you can do with it. Literally, it is the most useless, even gender studies is better than religion. And I am telling you, the amount of CEOs who've offered me 6 crazy starting salaries to do jobs I have zero experience or knowledge in or of. I was literally, again, I'm not saying this to sound braggadocious, I'm saying this to underscore an important point. I was offered $500,000 to work at a tech startup, and I told the guy, I don't even know how to turn on my iPhone. And he said, he literally said, it does not matter because we like the fact that you fight for American democracy and liberal values. Liberal in the classical sense of the word. And I'm not particularly intelligent, I'm not particularly articulate or wise or brave. I do not possess, I do not possess, get a 24-year-old girl to say the same thing and then we'll talk. I do not possess any, wait, listen, this is an important point, listen. Shh. I do not possess any degree of intelligence that you do not. I just don't. And if I can succeed, there's literally no reason that all of you in this room can't succeed just as well, if not a hell of a lot better. People, especially in the business world, they don't care about the college you went to. They just don't. They care about what are the things you believe in. Who are you as a person? If you show that you're committed to your faith, you're committed to your country, you stand up for your values, for your principle. I'm telling you this as fact, as someone who studied a worthless degree. I'm telling you that is what people care about, and more importantly, that is what you should care about. That is way more important than getting into a top college, which, by the way, they're not top colleges anymore. The American people have voted both at the ballot box and with their feet. The University of Austin has record enrollment. So many of these alternative modes of education are exploding. And as it pertains to Jews on college campuses, again, I'm not telling them where to go or not to go. What I am saying, it is way more important that you understand and commit yourself to the story of the Jewish people. Because the next chapter of the story of the Jewish people, it will either be written by you or it will be written by our ideological adversaries. And I'll tell you a very dirty secret, and this is the last question, so that's why I'm spewing. I'll tell you a very dirty secret. Of the people who told me, the encampment people who called for an intifada, who followed me on our way to class, who wrote that statement on October 7th, a lot of those people were Jewish. Zev is Jewish, Hannah's Jewish, Scott's Jewish, Michelle's Jewish, Ari's Jewish. These are Jews who've never gone to Jewish day school. They have zero affiliation with the Jewish synagogue. They can't locate Israel on a map. They certainly can't speak Hebrew. They can't identify a mitzvah outside of Tikkun Olam, which, newsflash, out of 613 options, that's not even one of them. These are Jews who believe that it is their religious obligation to call for an intifada and to support the causes of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And that is an embarrassment and a damning indictment on us, because we are responsible for the other Jewish nation. We are responsible for other Jews. We are responsible for the Jewish people. And while I hope that Jews recognize that their religious values are far more important than quote-unquote elite, which is code word for expensive colleges, at the same time I recognize that they are continuing to go to these colleges. I have zero effect on them, and I have zero effect on parents. I'll tell you one last thing. I know, I say that a lot, but it's somewhat entertaining. I have had a bunch of parents will come up to me after a talk, and they'll say, we have to send our kids to Columbia now more than ever to fight anti-Semitism. And I say, if you really think that's true, that it's your child's obligation to fight anti-Semitism, to spend 4 years of their lives, very impressionable, vulnerable moments of their life, to fight anti-Semitism, then just move to Dearborn, Michigan, because there's a lot of anti-Semitism there. But weirdly enough, no parent has ever once made that argument. Because, cut the crap, you don't care about your kid fighting anti-Semitism. Your kid doesn't keep Shabbos. What does it mean they're going to fight anti-Semitism? You care about your kid going to Columbia. And just be honest with yourself. I have never once had a parent come up to me and say, we need our kids to go to Rockland Community College. Because Rockland Community College had an encampment, and there was vicious anti-Semitism. Their encampment actually lasted longer than the one at Columbia. But no parent has ever once made the argument we should send our kids to Rockland Community College. Because let's call a spade a spade. Who the hell cares about Rockland Community College? And all I am saying is, well, who the hell cares about Harvard and Columbia and Penn? So Jews will continue to go irrespective of what I say and what I do. And that really adds fuel to our mission that wherever Jews are, it is our obligation to ensure that they recognize that they are the authors of the next chapter of the Jewish story. And I spoke for too long, but thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have him in our community. What a gift.